Of all the places on earth God could have given Abraham, he chose the single most dangerous piece of real estate in the ancient world. Not Egypt, with its predictable Nile floods and guaranteed harvests. Not Mesopotamia, where civilization had already built cities with running water and written law. Not some hidden valley tucked away from empires where a small nation could grow in peace. He chose a narrow land bridge, 60 miles wide in places, wedged between the Mediterranean Sea and the Arabian Desert, sitting directly on the only road connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. Every empire that ever rose to power had to march through it. Every army, every trade caravan, every conquest. And God looked at that sliver of land and said, "This is where I will plant my people." Why? That question changes everything about how you read the Bible. To understand why Canaan matters, you need to see the map the way an ancient person would have seen it.
Around 2000 BC, when God first speaks to Abraham in Genesis 12, the world has two power centers. To the southwest, Egypt, already ancient, already building monuments that would outlast every empire after it. The Nile floods every year with mathematical precision. The soil is black and rich. Famine is rare. Egypt is the closest thing the ancient world has to a guaranteed future. To the northeast, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Babylon, Akkad, Assyria. Cities with tens of thousands of people. Libraries, armies, ziggurats reaching toward the heavens. And between these two colossi, a thin corridor of hills, valleys, and coastline. The land of Canaan. No great river, no empire, no guarantee. Picture standing on the ridge of the Judean hills, looking west toward the sea and east toward the desert. The wind is dry. The soil is limestone and chalk. Rain comes, or doesn't, depending on the season. You can see the trade road below, the Via Maris, the way of the sea, and you know that anyone who wants to move between Egypt and Mesopotamia will pass within sight of where you're standing. That is the land God chose. Genesis 12:1. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Notice what God does not say. He does not name the land. He does not describe its fertility. He does not promise safety. He says, "Go to the land I will show you." The Hebrew word here is areka. I will cause you to see it. Abraham has to walk before he sees. He leaves Ur of the Chaldeans, one of the most advanced cities on earth. Archaeology tells us Ur had two-story brick houses, a school system, trade networks reaching India. Abraham walks away from all of it, toward a land he has never visited, on the word of a God he has only recently encountered. And when he arrives, Genesis 12:6, the text adds a line that most readers skim past. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The land is already occupied, already claimed, already full of fortified cities with walls and kings and armies. God brings Abraham to a land that is not empty. He brings him to a land that will require faith at every turn. Here is the first clue about why Canaan. God was never looking for the most comfortable place. He was looking for the place that would make faith unavoidable. Pull back from Abraham for a moment and look at the map again. The ancient Near East has a geographic feature scholars call the Fertile Crescent, an arc of cultivable land curving from Egypt through Canaan, up through Syria, and down into Mesopotamia. Outside this arc, desert. Inside, life. And Canaan sits at the hinge point where the crescent bends. Every major trade route of the ancient world funnels through Canaan. The Via Maris runs along the coast. The King's Highway runs east of the Jordan River. The Ridge route cuts through the Central Highlands. If you control Canaan,
You control the flow of goods, armies, and ideas between 3 continents. Now here is the detail most people miss. In Deuteronomy 11:10-12, Moses makes an extraordinary comparison. He tells Israel, "The land you are entering to take over is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come, where you planted your seed and irrigated it by foot, as in a vegetable garden. But the land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It is a land the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are continually on it from the beginning of the year to its end." Read that slowly. Egypt has the Nile. You dig a canal, you step on the irrigation pedal, water flows. You control your harvest. You depend on the river. Canaan has no river like that. Canaan depends on rain, and rain comes from heaven. Moses is saying, God deliberately chose a land where his people could not be self-sufficient, a land where every harvest would require them to look up. Egypt is the land of human control. Canaan is the land of divine dependence. And God chose dependence on purpose. I think that changes how you read every drought, every famine, every prayer for rain in the Old Testament. The geography was the lesson. Here is the question that should bother you. If God wanted to protect his people, why not give them an island, a hidden valley, a fortress of mountains unreachable by armies? Why plant them on the highway of empires? Nahum Sana, the great Jewish scholar, pointed out something remarkable. God placed Israel at the intersection of the world's civilizations so that they could never be invisible. Every nation that traded between Egypt and Mesopotamia would encounter Israel. Every empire that rose to power would have to deal with this small nation sitting on the crossroads. The Hebrew word for Canaan, Canaan, likely comes from a root meaning to be low or to be subdued. Some scholars connect it to the word for merchant or trader, because Canaan was the trading hub of the ancient world. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence from the 14th century BC found in Egypt, show Canaanite city kings writing to Pharaoh, begging for help, negotiating alliances, caught between powers. This was a land that was always contested. And God said, "Here." Think about what that means. God did not choose Canaan despite its vulnerability. He chose it because of it. A nation living on the crossroads of empires would either trust God for protection or fall. There was no middle ground, no coasting on geography, no hiding behind natural barriers. The promised land was designed to make complacency impossible. When God tells Abraham about the land in Genesis 15:18-21, he names the peoples living there: the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. 10 nations. Later, in Deuteronomy 7:1, the list narrows to 7, nations larger and stronger than you. Larger and stronger. God does not hide this. He does not say, "You will walk into an empty garden." He says, "You will face nations that outnumber and outpower you." Archaeological evidence confirms this. Canaan, in the late Bronze Age, was a network of fortified city-states. Hazor, in the north, covered 200 acres, one of the largest cities in the ancient Near East. Megiddo guarded the pass through the Carmel mountain range. Jericho had walls. Lachish had towers. These were not villages. They were military strongholds. And the Rephaim? The word carries echoes of giant clans, the descendants of ancient warrior peoples that appear throughout the biblical text. Numbers 13:33 records the spies' terrified report. "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." God chose a land full of fortified cities,
warrior peoples, and strategic choke points. And he told a family of nomadic shepherds, "This is yours." The gap between the promise and the reality is staggering. And that gap, I think, is the entire point. Now here is the layer most people never reach. Canaan was not only geographically strategic, it was spiritually contested. The Canaanite religion was, by every ancient account, one of the most elaborate and entrenched systems of worship in the Near East. Baal, Asherah, Molech, Dagon. The Ugaritic texts, discovered in 1929 at Ras Shamra in modern Syria, reveal a complex mythology. Baal fighting the sea god Yam, Baal descending to the underworld, fertility rituals tied to the agricultural cycle. The Canaanites believed that rain came from Baal, that fertility came from Asherah. That child sacrifice to Molech secured prosperity. The land was saturated with a theology that was the exact opposite of everything God would teach Israel. And God placed his people in the middle of it. Deuteronomy 12:2-3. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn their Asherah poles. God did not send Israel to a blank canvas. He sent them into the densest spiritual battlefield on the map. The contest was never just military. It was theological. Every time Israel chose to worship Yahweh instead of Baal, they were making a public declaration visible to every passing caravan, every diplomatic envoy, every empire watching from Egypt or Assyria. Canaan was the stage, and the audience was the entire ancient world. Go back to Deuteronomy 11 one more time, verses 13-17. If you faithfully obey the commands I am giving you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, then I will send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine, and olive oil. I will provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. And then the warning. Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that it will not rain, and the ground will yield no produce, and you will soon perish from the good land the Lord is giving you. Do you see the mechanism? In Egypt, rain doesn't matter. The Nile floods regardless of your theology. In Canaan, rain is the annual referendum on the nation's relationship with God. Every spring, every autumn, the skies either open or they don't, and the entire nation knows why. This is why Elijah's confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18 is the climactic scene of the Old Testament's spiritual war. Baal was supposed to be the rain god. 3.5 years of drought proved he was not. And when Elijah prays and fire falls from heaven, the question that had haunted Israel for generations is answered in a single afternoon. The land of Canaan made that contest possible. No other geography would have produced that story. Here is where the whole picture shifts. Isaiah 43:10. God speaks to Israel and says, "You are my witnesses." The Hebrew word is edai, my witnesses in the legal sense, people who testify, people who have seen something and now stand before a court to declare what they know. God did not plant Israel in Canaan to hide them. He planted them at the crossroads of the world so that every nation passing through would see what happens when a people trusts the Creator of heaven and earth. Israel was a living billboard positioned on the busiest highway of the ancient world. When Israel thrived,
When the rains came, the harvests overflowed, and enemies were defeated, the nations saw it. The Queen of Sheba traveled from the Arabian Peninsula to see Solomon's kingdom with her own eyes. 1 Kings 10:9. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. And when Israel fell, when they chased other gods and the rains stopped and the empires rolled through, the nations saw that too. Deuteronomy 29:24-25 predicts it. All the nations will ask, "Why has the Lord done this to this land? Why this fierce, burning anger?" And the answer will be, because this people abandoned the covenant of the Lord. The promised land was never a reward. It was a witness stand. Stand on a Mount of Olives and look out over Jerusalem. To the east, the Judean desert drops toward the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth. To the west, the hills roll toward the coast and the sea beyond it. South, the Negev stretches into silence. North, the road leads to Galilee, to Syria, to the ancient highways. And somewhere in this landscape, 4,000 years ago, an old man walked with his son toward a mountain, carrying wood and fire for a sacrifice that would define two religions and change human history. Somewhere in these hills, a shepherd boy ran toward a giant with 5 smooth stones. Somewhere on this ridge, a prophet stood alone against 450 priests and called fire from the sky. And on a hill just outside these walls, on a Friday afternoon, the God who chose this impossible, vulnerable, contested, rain-dependent, empire-surrounded piece of land hung on wood that grew from its soil. The land was never the point. The land was always the frame. Inside that frame, God painted the story of what happens when the creator of the universe chooses the weakest spot on the map and says, "Watch what I do here." At the beginning, I said God chose the single most dangerous piece of real estate in the ancient world. And now, you know why. He wasn't looking for safety. He wasn't offering comfort. He chose a land with no great river, no natural fortress, no hidden valley, a land that depended on rain from heaven, a land on the highway of empires, a land where every harvest was an act of trust, and every generation had to choose again. He chose it because faith that has a backup plan isn't faith. And somewhere in your life right now, there is a place that feels like Canaan, exposed, contested, dependent on something you cannot control. Maybe that is not the wrong place. Maybe that is exactly where you were meant to stand. If this opened something new for you, subscribe. Every week we go deeper into stories the world has forgotten. Your like helps this reach someone who needs to hear it.